Okay, it's February 12th, 2015. We're here at the Balboa Island Museum and Historical Society with Richard Higbie. We're conducting the program Over the Bridge Oral History Project. Our first question is, what is your earliest memory of the island?
1936, my parents rented a house called Hootathunket on the Grand Canal on the little island. And that portion of the little island, the inland lots, had been converted to a Shriners camp for in which they sent Down syndrome kids and a lot of the crippled children that the Shriners were caring for. They had to take them for the summer, and then they would then they'd close down the camp, I think, for the winter. And so that was kind of a noticeable thing for kids that had never seen that kind of thing before. And then when they had a funny story of a house that somebody had just purchased on the canal, and they bought the lot at high tide in the house, and they came back to see it what it was, and at that time the canal was empty. And so they were shocked, and everybody laughed about it because 6 hours later it was full again. And then every summer following that, we stayed at 225 East Bayfront in the downstairs unit of the Brudine home. The Brudines lived upstairs, and they rented out their lower unit to people from surrounding suburbs. My parents had come here, or when I was born, they lived in Hollywood and then moved to Glendale. And so the whole community was composed of a few people that made their life here, worked here in a shipyard or something, or didn't work anymore. And then the rest of the community sort of arrived there in late June and stayed through September. And all over Newport Beach and on the different places of the island, it seemed that people from different parts of Southern California would kind of all buy in a certain area. You know, there were people from Whittier in one part, and people from Redlands in another neighborhood, and there weren't many of us from Glendale, and because
What was daily life like for you then as a child? So with you being here throughout the summers, what would a day in your life look like?
Well, it was just nothing but play. Playing on the beach. We didn't, and sometimes the place that you rented would have a little rowboat that went with us and with it. And the house we rented at 225 East Bay had a pier that you could fish from, and tied to that pier was a fishing boat owned by Pete Peterson. And Pete Peterson owned the house at 227 East Bayfront, and he was dressed in overalls continuously, and he fished during the summer fishing season, and I don't know what he did in the winter. I don't think it much of anything. And Pete was just a famous sort of personable, somebody that kids could just love. He was quite large, and he always with a smile and a Swedish accent, and then he would often bring fish and give them to the families and so forth. But his particular bid for fame was that he always went barefoot. In fact, he was accused of having gone barefoot for years and years, and in fact, he had calluses on his bare feet and was able to strike a match and light his pipe. And all the kids thought that was the most heroic thing imaginable, was to see a guy strike a match on his bare foot, you know. And so none of us could even come close, and then we started walking around, scuffing our feet on the pavement, hoping to get some calluses. But all we ended up with was a bunch of broken stick matches on the street. But two of the guys that were part of the group that sort of revered Pete Peterson were Tommy and Sidney Chaplin, Charlie Chaplin's two boys, and they lived at 223. Their mother was from the Day family, which had been from Chicago originally, and she had been Charlie Chaplin's third wife, I think, and had these two boys. And then and the Day family was a little different than the rest of us that came from stark middle class kind of life. These people had been very wealthy and apparently lost their fortune during the 29 Depression, but they still had the glorious old Packard convertible, and they had some things, and so it was.
Do you recall what his children?
How do I turn this thing
Sure,
off?
I can assist you. Did you ever encounter Charlie by chance? I don't know if he visited his children and his third wife, Charlie Chaplin.
Yes. Oh, yeah. She lived there next door with the two boys, and but I never got to see Charlie Chaplin. He didn't come, but there was such a profound difference between the kids that had been from a wealthy family and kids from my family, which my father was a bank teller and my mother was a legal secretary from time to time, and there was, kids didn't do money, they didn't have money. Nobody gave the kids money except the Charlie Chaplin's two kids. They had a few dollars and they could buy gas for the outboard, and they were a little more adventuresome, a little older than my sister and myself, and so that was kind of an interesting thing to see for my sister and I. And so each summer we look forward to coming down and seeing everybody again and playing on the beach. And during the time we were there, the harbor was being developed. In 1933, they dredged it again. They dredged it, and all of the beaches were covered full of shells from all the clams that got thrown up on the beach. And my father and I spent a lot of time throwing cockle clam shells at the pier pilings and stuff. And then we had, then things progressed a little bit. My parents were able to buy a paddleboard for my sister and I. And one of the Richardson family had a little facility right across the bay over on Bayside Drive, where they had a fellow there that would made the first paddleboards that were around, and they were kind of hollow. And
do you recall his name or his company that developed those?
No, Richardson Yacht Anchorage, I guess they called it, and I'm not too sure what the fellow's name was that built those first paddleboards. And my sister and I, when we got a paddleboard, were able to.
It was constructed of solid wood?
No, they were hollow.
They were hollow, okay.
And they had sharp chines, and they paddled real well. And so my sister and I made a lot of different trips. And strangely enough, one of the things that we would do with our paddleboards was to wait till the round the island tour boat called the Malibu would come by. And the Malibu was owned and operated by two brothers, Les and Howard Tuitt, T-U-E-T, they spell that. And it was a fairly big boat, and and they drove it fairly fast because they were taking the tour, and I guess as soon as they could take the tour around the island and get home, and the boat made a pretty good wave, and my sister and I used to wait on our paddle boards and try to ride the bow wave from the old Malibu. And strangely enough, within the last week, or yesterday, I ran into Tuitt's daughter. And Tuitt is still alive, and she wanted me to represent him as a lawyer in a situation he's got. So this is from, and I got to go see him, and we talked about his driving the Malibu so fast and making these big bow waves so my sister and I could ride it. And so that family's still available. The Howard had just died over in Avalon, living in Avalon. And
when did you move to Balboa permanently with your family?
Well,
what year was that?
1949, the summer of 49, we came there as usual, and my folks, that was the year I graduated from high school, so my parents didn't go home, and my younger sister went to Harbor High. She was 3.5 years younger, and
her name?
Iris. Her middle name was Ann. She was called Iris Ann because her mother's name was Iris, and she's the eminent historian on things like this. And I'll try to convince her to come talk to you about a lot that she remembers. And let me see if there's any.
So you moved here summer of 1949. Do you recall why your parents decided to make that move? So you had known the area for over a decade. So what caused them to?
Well, I was finishing high school,
Uh-huh.
and they didn't, and going off to college, and it just seemed like a good time. And my father started a law practice here at Marine Avenue at 229, and there was a clothing store and back of the Shell gas station there on Balboa Avenue and Marine Avenue. Bud Miller owned the gas station, and I can't remember the family that owned whose mother owned the clothing store, but it'll come back to me one day. They later moved to Sun Valley.
Okay. What were businesses like at that time? Do you recall kind of how Marine Avenue was structured? Like what kind of?
Yeah, it was a lot different. There was 2 gas stations on Marine, and the Union and the Bud Miller Shell station, and there was a television repair or a radio repair shop called SOS Radio. Was one of the business I remember, and on across the street from my father's office, which was on Marine Avenue and Park, there was Boardman's Market. The Boardmans were an old family, and they had a big market there. And what other ones were kind of, and it was a hardware store, and it was pretty complete because a lot of the people did their own work on their houses. And there was a drugstore on the east side of Marine Avenue, and there was another drugstore named Riley's down on the corner of Marine Avenue and Park Avenue. It's now a real estate office, but pharmacy was kind of interesting place. It was just there was so little going on that all the people who ran these businesses had time to visit. And visiting the pinball and gambling in the 30s in Newport was sort of everywhere. And so the pinball machine, if you won a free game, they'd give you, instead of giving you another game, they'd give you a quarter. So people would come and try to learn how to guide pinball and by running it. And but the one, I think gambling went to it's the most ultimate form here on Balboa Island, in that they had a gumball machine on Marine Avenue. And in the gumball machine, they had they had about maybe 100 gumballs, and about 5 of them would be wooden. And if you got one of the wooden gumballs, you took it into Dodd's Malt Shop, which was there on Marine Avenue, and they'd give you a milkshake for it. And so I won a milkshake one time, but I thought gambling was just ultimate refinement with that gumball machine. And, you got odds on winning a milkshake.
Do you read, this is at the current arcade where it stands at Peninsula. Is this where these pinball machines were set up, or is this elsewhere?
Just right on the street on Marine Avenue where the gumball machine was. And then in the Dodd had a daughter that was around my age that was a swimming champion, and they were a nice little family here from the island.
Do you recall the dancing at the Peninsula, the ballroom operating in the 30s and 40s?
Well, mostly on the dance hall was in the 30s, early 30s, and in the 20s, my parents talked about going down to Newport and dancing at the ballroom. And but it wasn't the sort of thing that had any appeal to kids at my age or the age of my sisters. Then that all came kind of mostly after the war, where they started putting local bands in and making
the big bands.
Yeah, there's some local bands that got famous there. But and then about 1938, they had another dredging in the harbor to make it more accessible to larger boats and so forth. And I brought a copy of the Newport Harbor Development edition of September of 1985, in which they talk about the harbor improvements that were made. And here's one from 83, and then this one's from 85. You might want to look over and see if any of those things interest you. They belong to the San Diego Yacht Club, so you can look them over, because I promised my sister I'd bring them back.
With the expansion of the harbor and people moving here more permanently, how did the community change?
Well, there was quite a social difference between the people that lived here and the people that came in the summer. It's like two different places. The attitudes of the people that lived here permanently on how to survive, while the people that came in the summer, it was how to have a good time. So there wasn't all that much mixing. We mixed. The only people that we were real friendly with were the neighbors that we had on the East Bayfront, the Days and the Pete Peterson. And then the war came, and some people moved here to work in the shipyards, but that was a whole different type of our population that had come in the summer to play. So there was more workers from other than Newport that came and worked in these shipyards around here. And so the town kind of changed in character a little bit when the war started, and they started making more and more boats over in Newport, and the fishermen had to fish more and more to get the
So there's an economic growth, you think, here with the war industry?
Well, the stuff that came from building big boats disappeared after the war because nobody needed a minesweeper anymore, and nobody needed an air rescue boat, which was one of the boats they made here, the 82-foot rescue boat. It looks like a PT boat, but bigger, a little bigger, and they still had a couple of those boats there when the war was over that people bought and used them for yachts. And, but then South Coast contracted pretty dramatically, got a lot smaller because there was they had their roads designed boats. They started making the Albatross and the roads again after the war, and the Gull and the classes that they had been making in the 30s and early 41. The South Coast had been building. They started building them again, but that wasn't a big building effort that the war created here, and the shipyards cut way back and just began doing repairs again.
Do you recall during the war the blackouts? I know you were here during the summer months, so perhaps when they...
The blackouts were initially, there was spoken about the fact that Corona del Mar would be an interesting place for an invasion because the beach is something you can land on, and it wasn't too heavily defended by anybody. It was kind of a bit remote, and so they implemented a blackout. They took every street light in the city, painted the globe black except for about a 1 square inch hole that shined a little beam down on the sidewalk so you could find your way around the island. And I can still remember quite clearly one night an old friend of mine named Bill Van Drumlin lived at 120 Coral, and we decided to go to the movie over at the Balboa Theater. And on Wednesday at the Balboa Theater, they showed three short films of scary movies. Peter Lorre, and that were kind of scary. They were just scary movies with people jumping out and all that. And so we went over, it was light, we rode on our bicycles and went over on the ferry and watched the 3 movies. Got out of the thing about 9:30 or so, and I had to ride my bicycle all the way back to the East Bay front with a pitch black. And I got so scared by the time I got to Park Avenue, I just was in a horrible panic, and I raced home and jumped in bed and climbed under the covers and waited till quite a while before all the fear went out of me, and I wasn't expecting anybody to jump out from all the different trees along Park Avenue then.
Were most nights like that eerie when they had those blackouts? Was that a common feeling for people when they're walking around with such low light?
Well, yeah, there wasn't much. A lot of the people came to their summer home during the war, and then we went. My folks went back to Glendale, and we didn't think about it. But the cars couldn't use their headlights; they just had parking lights as the only thing they could use. So it was really dark, and they had a lot of air ray wardens that would come if you let any light out of your house. They'd come over and raise hell, and so everything was dark, and it was scary at night. So you didn't want to go anywhere particularly, so you stayed at home, and I think some of the parents got little card groups going, but there wasn't. Once in a while you go to the movie, and over at the Balboa.
Would you share why Balboa Island holds a special place in your heart?
when Balboa,
why it just holds such a special place in your heart. You've seen so much change over time, but just a personal reason why it's so special to you?
yeah, well, mostly it was because when I was young and growing up, Pete Peterson, the fisherman, taught me all about fishing, and I fished with him a little bit in the war, and the days that lived the other side, and that stories that they told, and in my first job at the Shell station in Balboa Island, and it just so many of the good things that happened in my life and the rewarding people, it just all happened when we were here, because your folks were on vacation, they were with you, and it was just a wonderful place to live. And all of the kids that came in the summers, parents were wonderful people, and they were all just nice, and with paradise, especially for the kid. And we had there were boats you could use anytime you wanted. And when I was 10 years old or 9 years old or something, the idea of being able to take your boat and going up in the upper bay where there was nothing was just an incredible excitement. And then going out on the fishing boats, that was a real drama, because the fishing boats only went 5 or 6 knots at that time, so you had to leave at 4 in the morning to get out to the 14-mile bank by sunrise. And then one time, in my first trip out there with Pete, I got so seasick I thought I was going to die, and finally got back home and didn't want to go back out again for a while. My sister, even my younger sister, went with him one time, and they got stopped. There was a submarine net across the harbor mouth, and they'd opened the submarine tents at first light and let the fishing boats out, and then they put the submarine net there, and then the fishing boats came back. They'd open the net, and one time they get Pete Peterson, he didn't look like everybody else, so they kind of given him a little trouble, and my sister got after him, and claiming, "That's Pete, you can't do that." So we survived that, and there was the Hollywood Navy, which were all the Hollywood actors that owned boats. They did some patrolling for the Coast Guard, and then there were groups that had dogs that would walk up and down the beaches to make sure no spies came ashore. All kind of stuff going on. Then they built some gun emplacements in the hills over Corona del Mar in case they tried to evade, have any sort of a landing at Corona del Mar Beach by the Japanese. And
speaking of Hollywood, this island is known to have celebrities reside here and visit, and so we were wondering if you had a favorite story about a celebrity you have met on the island.
Let me think of well, Paul Mance, the great stunt pilot, where they lived. Initially, they had a house on the East Bay front there on Balboa Avenue, and then they lived again on, I think, on about Amethyst Street, in a couple hundred block. And Paul Mance had a daughter, Tanita, and she was my age, my same class, and we went to SC together. But actually, they filmed. They did some movies over at Richardson's Yacht Anchorage, and I think the reason I remember that is it was kind of during the war. My sister and I took our paddle boards over there, and it turned out the catering truck left, but never picked up all the soda pop bottles. So my sister and I gathered all the pop bottles up and ferried them on our paddle boards back to Boardman's Market, which is still there, and not Boardman's, but to Hershey's Market, and we cashed them in for about 80 or 90 cents, and were then rich for a while. And there was, and let's see what other actors were, you could see once in a while. Howard Hughes had a boat here, and
Do you have a favorite Balboa Island story that brings back fond memories of your childhood, or brings out that inner child in you?
Well, let's see. When the Malibu, and let's see, there's the well, the Balboa, when on the little island, one of the things that were kind of interesting or exciting for the kid from Glendale was the Balboa Yacht Club was on the little island on the East Bay, and if you could walk down, we could walk down the block and a block and a half there and to the yacht club, and on sailboat racing days you could volunteer to be a crew on a snowbird that had a crew, but you didn't have to know how to sail or anything, and so we got to learn to sail a little bit by just hanging out at the Balboa Yacht Club, and it eventually moved off the island and went over to Newport, and that was kind of fun. And then they had let's see if there's anything
So you participate in the BIYC then, and just enjoy?
Yes, that was something that we did, and watched the flight of the snowbirds from the BIYC docks and everything. And one time I remember watching the flight of the snowbirds, and I can't remember the year, but there had been a local sort of a feud almost, in that some of the snowbirds were built for the 1932 Olympics that they had here in Newport Beach, some of the yacht racing events on the Los Angeles Olympic Games, and the Lewis family lived over in Balboa, had one of these snowbirds that had been built for the Olympics, and they were about 1.5 inches narrower than the regular snowbirds, and they insisted that these snowbirds were legal, and their kids were winning all the races, and everybody thought that they must be illegal because they were winning, and so there was a big flight of the snowbirds. I just can't remember what some month in the 40s sometime, and the Lewises were out in their snowbird, and the Beak family, who had conventional snowbirds built locally, were in the race, and two of the Beak boys swam out to the start and lifted the rudder out of the Lewis's Olympic snowbird, and caused it to miss the start and lose the race, and that story has been told a lot in the Beak family. I think any of the Seymour or was the youngest of it. He might have been the one that was sailing, but then his two older brothers went out and disabled the Olympic snowbird. And that kind of scandalous sort of thing. But
Quite the prankster.
No.
Hi, we're conducting an oral history. Are you here for the part 2?
What did you say?
We're doing the oral histories today. Are you here for the second portion?
I guess so.
Okay.
Where do you want me to sit out here?
Yes, please. We'll be right with you. Thank you. Great.
it was,
Well, we have a few more questions. Do you have any special holiday memories that relate to Balboa Island?
oh gosh, yeah, my my paddleboard, and they didn't have, nobody thought of doing any surfing in those days, but the paddleboard was a good way for the kids to get around, or the only way, or that or a bicycle. And what other,
Do you recall early Christmas memories or 4th of July? Those become quite, Balboa Island's become quite known for their celebrations of holidays with boat parades. Do you remember the inception of those or other
Yeah.
things?
no, my family wasn't much into boating, so we didn't ever have a boat, and didn't take too much take part in the parade. And back in the 30s and 40s, we got invited from time to time, in the parades that took place after the war. I can remember seeing the big ships in the shipyard over there at Larson's and Roseanne's. And one of the memories, one of the Roseanne kids whose family had that factory over in Coates Highway making parts for the used during the war. When the war ended, he got a sailboat called the Teak Lady, and we tried to sail it to Catalina. And got pretty close before the wind gave up, and somebody towed us in, and we were able to sail back. And Jose Roseanne was the son that was my age, and his father had been a client of the law firm where my father worked.
Well, we also were wondering about the feeling that you get when you drive over that bridge or walking over it. Is there something unique to you that you experience?
Yeah, when I walk over that North Bay Bridge, or even I can remember going up there we were staying on the North Bay at that time, and everybody was talking about jumping off the bridge. I went up there to jump off the bridge and discuss not jumping into a boat. And so I'm standing up there just nervous as a cat, scared to jump off. And my younger sister comes up on the wall, jumps in, swims ashore, comes back, jumps in again. I'm still standing on the bridge, scared. I can't remember whether I finally jumped in or whether I walked home. But that was definitely a guy that loved risks.
Well, certainly this was a place for a lot of adventure.
Yeah.
For a child and just through your adolescence, it sounds like.
But there was kind of more adventure during the war because they were having lots of funny thing going on in the shipyard, building these ships, and then leaving the harbor, and then of course before the war too, they had a couple of big speedboats that would take people to Catalina, and that was fun to watch. But we didn't have the resources to hire a speedboat to take us over to Catalina, so I never got to ride in the boat. But they were pretty noticeable.
A lot of Hollywood would also
Yeah,
take off too heavily from here and use the docks. So very noted for residing here and also frequenting the
yeah.
island there. It's a pretty neat connection.
Then I got a job on the ferry boat, and about I don't know, I was in high school, and that was kind of exciting. And one of the interesting sidelines to that, after you'd worked on the ferry boat a little while, you had enough qualifications to get to be a driver, and you had to get the license they had in those days was a boat under 65 feet, and the ferry boats were all built to 65 feet, so people with this motorboat operator's license could be legal to drive. And I went down to get the license, and what I hadn't realized was the commandant of the Coast Guard name was Higbie. And everybody thought I must be a relation because they didn't know any other people named Higbie. And boy, that test went real quickly. I had studied for it by going to the yachtsman's luncheon at the Newport Harbor Yacht Club, and they had a power squadron meeting there and talked to everybody how to drive boats safely and how not to start them up with fuel in the bilge and things like that. So then I got to drive a while, and then by then I'm in college, and things have less and less time to drive the ferry boat. I did that for a couple of years. 1952 was the last year I worked on the ferry.
Well, this concludes the set of questions that we've been asking all of the candidates. So if there's anything you'd like to add to the record, we'd be glad to hear that.
Yeah, let's see. No, it was just paradise for my sister and I.
I'd like to hear that.
And I just thank my folks for thinking of us and saving up and saving all our money so we could come spend for a summer vacation here on the island. And then my father would sometimes take that red car to work, and the trolley that came by, and then I guess the next thing, in 1958, I got appointed on the planning commission. And then at that time they were abandoning the railroad, and they wanted to redevelop the Balboa Peninsula. And the house I have now is right on the old railroad track that's now gone. So my house isn't square because the railroad was going around the curve there, heading on down to Balboa.
Quite different.
But everything was exciting. But I guess another incident that kind of strikes in my mind, when we lived next door to a family named Bonji. This was on the North Bay front back in the late 40s. You know, the war was still going on, so it must have been about 44 or 45. And he had an airplane at the airport in Costa Mesa. And we used to go fly it over to Chino to get cream and vegetables that you couldn't buy at the local stores, and come back, and that was kind of an exciting time, getting to do that flying back during the end of the war, and no one there.
Fantastic.
They didn't allow plane that much.
Right.
Everything was exciting, and I just am thankful I can come express my enthusiasm.
We thank you for your time. We appreciate the wonderful record you've created of your story. So this concludes our portion of our interview. Thanks so much.